The Draugr Plague, Gold Beneath Snow. Season 1, Episode 1. The longship pushed into the frozen fjord with its prow lowered against the ice. A white sheet cracked in front of it. The broken pieces lifted, scraped along the hull, and turned in the black water. Each stroke of the oars dragged the ship nearer to home, but the sound was not the one Ulfric had carried in his mind through the voyage back. He had imagined shouting from the shore. He had imagined men calling before the village could see their faces. He had imagined children running ahead of their mothers, dogs barking at their heels, and smoke rising strong from the longhouses. He had held that picture through cold water, torn sailcloth, and nights when the crew slept with their hands closed around their weapons. He needed the return to sound like survival. Instead, the fjord answered with ice. Ulfric stood near the prow with one hand around the rail. Frost clung to his beard and stiffened the loose ends of his hair. Dried blood had darkened the wool at his sleeve. When the ship lurched, the cloth pulled against the wound underneath, but he did not look down. Pain was easier than the shore. Behind him, the crew rowed without song. The oars dipped into narrow lanes of water, rose with ice along the edges, and dipped again. Men who had once laughed through bad weather now saved their breath for the next pull. One rower worked with bandaged fingers. Another kept lifting his head toward the landing, as if he needed proof that the village still stood. Ulfric understood that look. Late winter changed the shape of home. Snow pressed roofs low. Hunger thinned faces until even familiar people looked distant. When Ulfric had led the crew away, the village had already been counting every strip of dried fish and every scoop of meal. He had told himself the raid would answer that hunger. He had told himself that enough spoil would put food back into bowls and strength back into voices. Enough had carried him over the sea. Now the shore came into focus, and the word felt weaker. The longhouses crouched under snow. Thin smoke slipped from their roof holes and flattened in the wind. There were fires inside, but not strong ones. Fires that small meant people were saving fuel. They meant families sat close and still, trying to make one weak flame serve too many hands. No dogs ran along the landing. No children rushed forward. Nets hung from poles near the water, stiff with ice and empty of fish. The racks beyond them were bare. A torn hide snapped against a post. No one shouted over it. Ulfric tightened his grip on the rail. The ship hit another plate of ice. Wood groaned under his boots. The prow lifted, shook, and dropped hard enough to send a jolt through the deck. Several men bent lower over their oars. One man muttered under his breath, then pulled again because there was no strength left for complaint. Something shifted behind Ulfric. It was a dull sound under frost-stiff hides, a heavy settling as the ship rocked. The covered spoil did not shine. No bright edge showed under the wrappings. It lay lashed in place, quiet and heavy enough to change how the longship rode. Ulfric did not turn. If he looked back, he might start counting before the village did. He might think of what could be traded, divided, guarded, stolen, or lost. He wanted to believe the cargo behind him was an answer. But each scrape of ice made the ship feel heavier, and each silent face on the shore made the answer less certain. A door opened in the nearest longhouse. Then another. People appeared in the dark spaces, wrapped in patched cloaks and old furs. They did not wave. Some stepped into the wind, but most stayed near their thresholds. Their faces were pale and narrow. Their eyes followed the longship as if food, heat, and spring might be hidden somewhere beneath the covered bundles. Ulfric looked for the welcome he had imagined. He saw a woman near the landing with a child held beneath her cloak. The child was not reaching, pointing, or hiding. The child was simply still, in the careful way hungry children learned when movement cost too much. The woman's hand rested on the small back and did not move. Near the landing stones, Ulfric noticed an empty space where stronger hands should have waited. There should have been men ready to laugh, shout, and drag the ship in before the keel touched. Instead, 2 old men stood with rope burns already dark on their palms, and a boy too young for the work watched them as if he might have to take their place. Ulfric looked away first. He had brought men home, but not all the men he had taken. He had brought weight aboard the ship, but no promise that the weight would be enough. The village had come out to see him, and no one needed to ask aloud what the return had cost. The ice caught the keel. The longship stopped with a hard jolt. Oars knocked against their logs. One rower slid from his bench and caught himself on another man's shoulder. The covered bundles behind Ulfric shifted again, low and heavy, and for a moment the ship seemed held between fjord and shore. Ulfric raised his hand. The crew stilled. Wind moved over the ice. The hull creaked. On the shore, more people came out from the longhouses, drawn by the halt. No one called his name. The silence did not feel like insult. It felt like the village had spent its welcome before he arrived. He set both hands on the rail and turned enough for the crew to hear him. "Pull," he said. His voice was low, but it reached the benches. The men leaned into the oars. Wood bent under their effort. Ropes tightened. The longship shuddered but did not move. Ulfric felt the ship resist him, felt the cargo drag at it, felt the shore waiting for one command to do what hunger had asked of him for months. "Again," he said. This time the crew pulled harder. Shoulders bowed. Boots scraped against the wet deck. The oars bit into the black water between the broken plates. The prow rose a little, then a little more. A crack opened ahead of it and ran outward across the ice toward the landing. The sound snapped through the fjord. The ship broke free. Ice slid away along both sides. The longship lurched forward, and the men caught themselves on benches and ropes. A breath moved through the shore. It was not a cheer. It was too thin for that. It sounded like people who wanted to hope, but were afraid to spend hope too quickly. Ulfric heard it, and the belief he had carried from the raid strained inside him. The landing stones waited ahead, black with frozen spray. A rope flew from the bow. A man on shore caught it with both hands, and the pull nearly dragged him to his knees. 2 others seized the line behind him. They leaned back together, not shouting, not celebrating, only hauling because the ship had to come in and hunger had no strength to waste on ceremony. The crew shipped the oars one by one. Each blade came up white along the edge. The hull slid over broken plates, and the scraping softened but did not stop. Ulfric watched the villagers pull. He saw the gaps between them now, spaces where stronger men should have stood, doorways where children should have crowded, a cold patch near the smithy where heavier smoke should have risen. No raider had raised a banner over this place. No enemy stood on the shore to claim it. Winter had taken from the village 1 meal and 1 weak fire at a time. Ulfric could not strike it down. He could only stand at the prow while the people he had left behind pulled his heavy ship toward them. The keel touched stone with a low knock. No one cheered then either. Ulfric stayed at the prow while the crew waited behind him and the village waited before him. The covered weight aboard the ship seemed larger because no one named it. He had reached home. He had brought back what he could. He had made the ship heavy with the answer he wanted to believe in. But the shore still looked hungry, and the silence made his victory feel unfinished before he had even stepped down. Ulfric stood between the starving shore and the burdened ship, with ice grinding softly against the hull below his feet. They unloaded the covered bundles under the eyes of the whole village. No one called it a feast. No one called it a victory. The people gathered because the ship had come home heavy, and hunger had taught them to come near anything that might be divided. Men with hollow cheeks stood beside women with empty baskets. Children watched from behind patched skirts and old cloaks. Even the dogs, thin as rope, kept close to the doorways and did not bark. Ulfric stepped down onto the landing stones first. The village waited for him to speak. He could feel that waiting like a hand between his shoulder blades. Behind him, the crew passed down sacks, chests, wrapped blades, and bundles tied in stiff leather. The cargo struck the stones with dull, rich sounds. Each sound made heads turn. A chest slid from two men's hands and hit the ground hard enough to split one strap. Gold showed through the tier. The village breathed in. It was a small sound, but it reached Ulfric more sharply than any cheer. The gold caught the weak daylight and gave it back warmer than the sky had any right to be. A bracelet lay against a heap of coins. A cup with a bent rim rolled half out of the cloth and stopped against a man's boot. For a moment, no one looked hungry. They looked fixed in place by wanting. Leif the Skald came down from the ship with his harp wrapped against his chest. He was tired enough that frost had whitened one side of his beard and dried blood marked the side of his tunic where another man's wound had leaned against him during the voyage. Still, when he reached the stones, he straightened. He looked at the villagers, then at Ulfric, and then at the torn cloth where the gold shone. "You see the weight of it," Leif said. His voice carried over the landing. People turned toward him because they knew that voice. It had named births, marriages, feuds, and dead men. It had made loss bearable by giving it shape. "You see what your sons and husbands dragged home through black water and ice. You see what was taken from those who would have let us starve. You see the price paid by men who did not turn their oars back when the sea tried to break them." A few of the crew lifted their heads. Ulfric did not stop him. The men needed the praise. The village needed more than sacks on stone. It needed to believe the empty spaces on the rowing benches had meaning. Leif touched the torn chest with 2 fingers. "This is not only gold," he said. "This is meal not yet bought. This is iron. This is roof that will not fall. This is fishhooks, salt, lamp oil, and winter held back one more night. Remember the names of those who brought it. Remember the names of those who did not return to see it shared." The villagers shifted. Someone began to weep softly, not from grief alone and not from joy alone. One of the old men at the rope bowed his head. A boy near the fish racks stared at the cup as if it were a loaf of bread. Ulfric looked over the faces and felt the danger in Leif's words. They were true. They were also incomplete. The raid had not been clean. The dead they left behind would not be fed by praise. The men who had died under Ulfric's command would not warm their hands at this gold. Yet the village needed a story that could sit beside hunger without breaking. "Open the rest," one of the raiders said. Another man laughed once, too loudly. "Let them see what we froze for." The laugh did not spread, but the request did. Men bent toward the bundles, fingers worked at knots, leather scraped over stone. More gold appeared, piece by piece, each flash drawing the gathered people closer. Freya moved to Ulfric's left. She had not spoken since the ship touched shore. Her hand rested near the knife at her belt, not because the villagers threatened him, but because wanting made people forget where their hands were. Ulfric noticed the way her eyes moved from face to face. She saw the same thing he did. Relief could become grabbing before anyone meant it to. keep them back," he said quietly. Freya gave one short nod and stepped forward. She did not shout. She only placed herself between the first line of villagers and the open bundles. That was enough for some to remember themselves. A woman pulled her child's hand away from the stones. A crewman frowned, but he lowered the cup he had lifted. Then Astrid came from the longhouse path. No one had called for her. The crowd made room anyway. She walked with her staff in one hand and her other hand open at her side, as if feeling the air before her. A strip of dark cloth covered her ruined eyes. Frost had gathered along the edge of it. Her face was calm, but each step looked costly, as though she had heard something no one else had heard and had followed it into the cold. Leif's voice softened when he saw her. "Astrid," he said, "come hear what the sea returned to us." She stopped at the edge of the opened hoard. The gold lay in front of her, bright against leather and snow. She could not see it in the way the others saw it, but her head turned slightly and her mouth tightened. The crowd watched her. Even the crew stopped untying knots. "This did not return from the sea," Astrid said. Leif lowered his hand from the chest. Ulfric felt the cold pass under his cloak. "It was one of the raiders said. "Ask the men who bled for it." Astrid turned toward the voice. "Blood can win many things. It does not make them clean." The words struck the gathering harder than a shout would have. A woman crossed herself in the old way, thumb touching brow and breast. A raider spat into the snow, but he did not speak again. Leif took one careful breath. "If there is a warning in you, give it plain. These people have eaten warning all winter." "Plain, then," Astrid said. "The gold is unclean." No one moved. Ulfric looked at the opened bundles. He saw bracelets, coins, a torn chain, a cup, bright pieces from halls that were not theirs. He saw food in them because hunger forced that shape onto everything. He saw his dead crewmen in them because guilt did the same. "Unclean how?" he asked. Astrid's covered face turned toward him. "I do not know all of it," she said, and the honesty made the words worse. "I know enough. It carries a cold that does not belong to winter. It is heavy with wanting. Do not let every hand touch it. Do not let men sleep beside it. Do not call it blessing before the dead have heard what you took." A murmur moved through the villagers. Leif looked from Astrid to Ulfric. The skull's praise had not vanished, but it no longer filled the air. It stood beside her warning now, and the two things could not both be easy. One of the younger raiders bent to tie the torn strap back across the chest. His hands shook, though he tried to hide it. Another man watched the coins too closely. A child whispered that the gold was pretty, and his mother covered his mouth. Ulfric wanted to order the bundles closed. He wanted to order them opened and counted. He wanted to tell Astrid she had brought fear to people who already had too much of it. He wanted to tell Leif to keep speaking until the village remembered how to hope. Instead, he looked at the gold and saw every face leaning toward it. "No one takes from the hoard until I say," he said. The command steadied the crowd, but only a little. Astrid lowered her head. Leif stepped back from the chest. Freya remained between the gold and the hungry hands. The torn wrapping stayed open at Ulfric's feet, and the gold shone through it as if the cold day had bent down to look. They moved the hoard before dusk because no one wanted it left open on the landing. Ulfric chose the burial shed because it was close, cold, and built of heavier timber than the storehouses. It stood beyond the last longhouse, half sunk into old snow, with a roof low enough that the wind passed over it instead of tearing at it. The place had held bodies through hard ground and long freezes. It had kept the dead until fire, thaw, or family could claim them. Now it held gold. Men carried the chests in silence. Freya walked beside the first pair, watching the straps, the hands, and the faces. Leif followed with a strip of waxed cloth under one arm, ready to mark what had been brought from the ship. Astrid came last, staff tapping the frozen path. The villagers did not follow all the way. They stayed near the longhouses and watched from a distance, as if the warning had drawn a line in the snow. Ulfric noticed who remained behind. He noticed who did not. A few raiders walked too close to the chests. One man kept his fingers hooked through a torn strap even after another hand had taken the weight. A second man looked back toward the village before he looked at the shed, as if checking whether anyone saw how near he stood. "Set it inside," Ulfric said. The first chest crossed the threshold. Cold air came out to meet them. It smelled of old wood, old cloth, and the sour stillness of bodies kept too long from fire. The burial shed had no proper window. Only thin seams between boards let in pale light. Shapes lay along the far wall beneath hides and stitched linen. The dead had been waiting before the ship returned. Hunger had not paused for mourning. One of the men carrying the chest hesitated. "Keep moving," Freya said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried an edge. The man obeyed. They set the chest near the center of the shed. Another followed. Then sacks. Then the torn bundle with the bright cup wrapped again inside it. Leif knelt by the threshold and wrote marks on his cloth with a sharpened bit of charcoal. 3 chests, he said. 6 sacks. 2 wrapped bundles. 1 cracked cup. Bracelets. Chains. Loose coin. Blades with silver on the hilts. "Do not make a song of the list," Astrid said. Leif looked up. "A list is not a song. It becomes one in your mouth." He accepted that with a small bow of his head and wrote more carefully. Ulfric stood just inside the doorway, letting his eyes adjust. The dead along the wall seemed smaller under their coverings than living bodies should have been. One had a hand outside the cloth, stiff fingers curled toward the floor. A strip of blue cord marked the wrist. Ulfric knew the cord. It had belonged to Hakon, a cousin on his mother's side, a man who had spent autumn repairing nets and pretending he did not cough blood into the snow. Hakon had died while Ulfric was gone. No one had told him yet. There had been too many other things to see first. Ulfric looked away from the hand. "We will set a guard," he said. "No one enters without my word." A raider named Sten gave a short laugh. "Against whom? The hungry?" "Against the hungry first," Ulfric said. The laugh died. Astrid stepped farther inside. Her staff found the floorboards 1 tap at a time. She stopped before the first chest. The gold inside made no sound, but her face tightened as if something had spoken too near her ear. "Too close," she said. Ulfric followed her covered gaze. "To what?" "To those who cannot refuse it." One of the men made the old sign again. Another muttered that the dead wanted nothing. Astrid turned toward him. "Then why are the living afraid to say their names in here?" No one answered. Leif lowered the charcoal. His eyes had gone to Hakon's uncovered hand. He knew the cord too. The skald's mouth moved once, shaping the name without sound. A board creaked under the far wall. Everyone froze. The wind pressed against the shed, then eased. Snow hissed along the outside boards. For a moment, that was all. Sten swallowed. "The roof." "No," Astrid said. Ulfric lifted one hand, stopping every man in place. Freya already had her knife out. The blade was small in the dim shed, but her grip was steady. The sound came again, not from the roof, from the far wall, from under the hides. Leif stood too quickly and struck his shoulder against the doorframe. The charcoal fell from his fingers. One of the chest-bearers backed into another man, and the two nearly stumbled over a sack of coins. The sack shifted, spilling a few pieces across the floorboards. The coins rolled toward the covered bodies. Ulfric saw one coin stop against Hakon's exposed fingers. No one breathed. The finger moved. It was so small a motion that for one heartbeat Ulfric refused it. The cold could pull at dead flesh. A floorboard could shift. A man's eye could betray him in bad light. Then the hand closed around the coin. The sound was dry and soft, like a twig bending under frost. A young raider cried out. Freya stepped forward, but Ulfric caught her arm before she crossed the shed. He did not know why he stopped her. He only knew that if she rushed at the body, everyone else would rush too, and the small dark room would become knives, panic, and trampled gold. "Hold," he said. His own voice sounded far away. The cloth over Hakon's body shifted, not enough for the dead man to rise. Not enough for anyone to call it an attack. Just enough for the shape beneath the hide to become a person again, not a bundle waiting for rites. Astrid whispered the dead man's name. The hand tightened around the coin until the knuckles seemed ready to split. Leif bent slowly and picked up his charcoal, but he did not write. Sten pressed his back to the wall near the door. Another man was praying under his breath with no rhythm, only the same two words again and again. Ulfric looked from the covered body to the open chest. The gold lay close enough for cold light to touch the dead hand. He had wanted an ordinary answer, some trick of ice, some last motion of a body not yet settled into death. But the hand did not open. It held the coin like a starving man holding bread. Freya's arm stayed tense beneath his grip. "Ulfric," she said. He heard the warning in her voice, not fear alone, readiness. He let go of her slowly. The body did not rise. The shed did not fill with voices. No god spoke. No answer came from the cold. Only Hakon's dead hand held the coin, and the gold around it shone faintly in the dimness, as if the covered hoard had found a way to be seen. Night came before the village finished being afraid. No one went early to sleep. Fires burned low because fuel was scarce, but doorways stayed open longer than they should have. People stood in small groups outside the longhouses with their cloaks tight around them. They spoke in low voices and stopped whenever the wind changed. The burial shed waited beyond the last line of light. Ulfric had posted 2 men at the path and 2 more near the door. He had ordered the spilled coins gathered with a strip of leather, not bare hands. He had ordered the chests shut. He had ordered Hakon's body left covered until Astrid decided what words should be spoken over it. The orders had sounded strong when he gave them. Now, in the dark, they felt like sticks set against a tide. Ulfric stood outside the shed with Freya at his right and Astrid near the door. Leif remained a few steps behind them, holding a small board and a knife point blackened with charcoal. He had not written Hakon's name yet. Ulfric had seen him try twice and stop twice. Inside the shed, nothing moved. That was what the guard said. That was what Ulfric had seen when he looked. The dead hand still held the coin beneath the hide, but the body had not risen. The other dead lay still. The gold was shut away in chests and sacks. Still, no one wanted to turn their back on the door. "He should have had fire," Freya said. Ulfric did not answer at once. Hakon had died while the crew was gone. The ground had been too hard, the wood too precious, and the village too hungry. So the body had waited. Others had waited with him. That had been the law of winter long before this night. Tonight it sounded like failure. "Many should have had fire," Ulfric said. Freya looked at him. "That is not an answer." "No," he said, "it is what we have." Astrid's staff touched the frozen ground once. "Do not make poverty into innocence," she said. The words were not loud, but Ulfric felt them. He turned toward her, anger rising because anger was easier than the shed door. "Will you weigh every hungry choice against us tonight?" "No," Astrid said. "The dead are doing that." Leif's knife point stopped against the board. A sound came from the village. One drumbeat. It rolled through the cold and died against the snow. Everyone turned. Another beat followed. Then a third. Not fast, not festival rhythm, not rowing rhythm. The old hide drum near the central fire was used for warning in storm, fire, and wolf sighting. Whoever struck it now left long spaces between each blow, as if the hand holding the stick could not decide whether to summon people or keep them away. Boom. The guards at the path looked back toward the village. Boom. A child began crying somewhere near the longhouse doors. Boom. From inside the burial shed, wood scraped against wood. The guards at the door stepped away together. Ulfric moved before he thought. He took the torch from the nearest guard and shoved the door open with his shoulder. Cold air struck him, carrying the smell of old linen and metal. The torchlight entered in a red, shaking oval. At first he saw only the chests. Then the hide over Hakon's body lifted. The dead man sat up. One of the guards made a sound like he had been hit. Freya pushed past him and stopped just inside the doorway, knife raised. Ulfric caught the edge of the doorframe with his free hand. He knew Hakon's face. Everyone in the village knew it. The dead man had mended nets, laughed badly at his own jokes, and carved small birds from driftwood for children too sick to leave their beds. Now frost filled his beard. His skin had gone the grey-white of old snow under moonlight. His eyes were open, but they did not search the room as a living man's eyes would. They fixed on the floor, on the chests, on the small scatter of coins that had not been found beneath a fold of cloth. Hakon's hands moved slowly to his own chest. The hide slipped down. Coins clung to his ribs. Some had frozen to the torn linen. Some seemed pressed into the dead flesh itself by ice and old blood. They caught the torchlight in broken flashes each time his body jerked. He had no breath to steam in the cold, yet a thin sound came from him, a dry pull from somewhere below the throat. Behind Ulfric, Leif whispered the name at last. Hakon. The dead man's head turned, not like a man answering, like a thing pulled by a rope tied to memory. Leif stepped back so quickly his heel struck a stone. The board fell from his hand. Astrid reached out and caught his sleeve before he could stumble. "Do not give him more words," she said. The drum sounded again from the village. Hakon stood. He did it badly. One knee folded under him, then straightened with a crack. His shoulder struck the wall. A hanging strip of linen tore and drifted to the floor. The dead along the far wall did not rise, but every covered shape seemed larger now that one had moved among them. Freya lifted her knife higher. "Tell me to strike," she said. Ulfric could not. The thing before him was wrong, but it was Hakon. Not in soul, perhaps, not in mind. Ulfric did not know those answers. He knew the face. He knew the blue cord on the wrist. He knew the carved bird still hanging over two children's sleeping places. Hakon's fingers dug at the coins on his ribs. He did not pull them free. He clutched them. His nails scraped metal and frozen cloth. The dry sound in his throat came again, and this time several villagers outside heard it. The murmur beyond the door broke into gasps. Ulfric raised the torch. Hakon leaned toward the flame, then away from it. Not fear as a living man knew fear, more like resistance, more like old hunger pushed back from heat. Astrid stepped to the threshold. "He is bound," she said. "To what?" Ulfric asked. Her covered face turned toward the dead man, and then toward the chests, to what he held, to what was brought near him, to what we wanted too much. "I know no more than that." It was enough. Hakon took one step. Freya moved between him and the doorway. The dead man's hand came up, not reaching for her throat, not striking with a warrior's aim, but pushing blindly toward the shine at his own ribs and the gold beyond her. His fingers brushed her sleeve. Frost cracked off them onto the floor. Freya did not flinch. "Ulfric," she said again. This time, it was not a question. It was a demand for command. Ulfric forced the torch closer. Hakon recoiled, shoulders jerking, coins flashing across his ribs. The movement drove him backward into the shed wall. The boards shook. Snow sifted through the gaps above him. Outside, the drumbeat stopped. The silence after it was worse. Every person near the shed heard the dead kinsman scrape at the coins fixed to his own body. Every person saw Ulfric holding fire, but not yet knowing what lawfire should serve. Every person saw the gold chests behind the dead man, shut but not safe. Hakon stood in the torchlight, upright in the night, with coins frozen to his ribs and snow blowing through the broken seams behind him. By the time Hakon stopped moving, no one called the gold a blessing. They did not destroy him. They did not know how. Ulfric held the torch close until the dead kinsman backed into the far corner of the shed, still clutching the coins frozen to his ribs. Freya and two guards dragged a storage door from its hinges and braced it across the corner with spear shafts and rope. The barrier would not hold against strength for long. It held against that slow, bound reaching. For the moment, that was all they had. The village gathered in the dark outside the shed. Some had come because of the drum. Some because fear travels faster than sound. They stood in half circles with blankets over their shoulders and children hidden behind them. No one pushed forward now. No one asked to see the raid gold. The hunger had not vanished from their faces, but it had learned to stand beside terror. Ulfric came out with the torch in his hand. The wind bent the flame sideways. It showed blood where a splinter had torn his palm. It showed Freya behind him, breathing hard, with frost caught in her hair. It showed Astrid near the threshold, one hand against the shed wall as if she could feel the dead through the wood. It showed Leif kneeling in the snow, gathering his fallen board and trying not to look at the door. Ulfric faced the village. He could have lied. He could have said Hakon's body had shifted in the cold and frightened weak hearts. He could have ordered everyone back inside and let morning carry the weight. Some would have accepted the lie because they wanted it. Others would have repeated it until it sounded true. But the sound from inside the shed came again. Wood scraped. A rope tightened. The storage door creaked under a dead hand. No lie could cover that. "The hoard is sealed," Ulfric said. The words came out rough. He forced them louder. "No one touches it. No one takes from it. No one trades it, weighs it, hides it, wears it, or sleeps beside it. Any man who has already taken a piece will bring it to me before dawn. Any woman, any elder, any child who finds a piece will bring it to me. It will be locked away until we know what has followed it home." A murmur moved through the crowd. Not protest, not agreement, the sound of people measuring fear against need. Sten stood near the front with his hands under his cloak. "And what do we eat while the answer sits behind a door?" Freya turned on him. "You heard what stood behind that door." "I heard a dead man," Sten said, but his voice shook. "I also hear children crying from hunger." Several faces lowered. That was the cruel part. He was not wrong enough for anger to be simple. Ulfric stepped closer to him. You will eat what we can divide from stores and what we can take from traps. You will not feed your house with that. You brought it, Sten said. The words struck the circle silent. Ulfric did not move. He deserved the blow, and everyone knew it. The gold had not walked into the village. His ship had carried it. His orders had led men to it. His hands had helped bring it home. Yes, he said, and now I order it shut. Sten looked away first. Astrid lifted her head. Bring out the chests. Not into the open. Into the old fish stall. Stone floor, iron bar, one door, no sleeping wall beside it. Ulfric looked back at her. You said it was too close to the dead. It is, she said. So move it while the dead still reaches for what is near. Move it with fire between hand and gold. Then close it where no body lies waiting. She did not make it sound safe. She made it sound less wrong. Ulfric nodded. Freya. Choose men who can obey. Freya's eyes went through the crowd like a blade through cloth. She pointed to 4 raiders, then to 2 older villagers whose hunger had not made their hands restless. No one argued with her choices. They worked under torchlight. The chests came out one by one. Each was tied shut and carried on poles so no hand had to grip the metal. Sacks followed, knotted twice. Leif stood near the path and spoke each count aloud, not as praise now, but as witness. 1 chest, 2, 3, 6 sacks, 2 bundles. His voice trembled only once, when Hakon struck the braced door inside the shed, and the whole village flinched. Ulfric watched every load pass. He watched Hans most of all. A man could hide wanting in his face. Hands were less skilled, fingers opened too soon, palms turned inward. Sleeves pulled low. Twice Ulfric stopped a carrier and made him show both hands before moving on. Both times the man cursed him. Both times the hands were empty. That made Ulfric feel no better. Near the fish store, the old stone threshold had to be cleared of ice. Men hacked it free with the backs of axes. The first chest scraped over the sill and into the dark. A torch was set in an iron bracket. Its light reached the walls and showed old hooks, empty racks, and salt stains where fish had once hung in better winters. There, Astrid said from the doorway. Not clean, but contained. Ulfric gave the order to bar the door. An iron beam dropped into place. Rope followed. Then a second bar taken from the smith's shed. He pressed his wounded palm against the wood and felt the cold come through. No one enters without me, he said. The men around him nodded. Behind them, close to the path, a younger crewman named Orm bent as if to tighten the strap on his boot. No one watched him, except a child, too small to understand what he saw. Orm's fingers went into the snow beside a dropped scrap of leather. When his hand came back, it closed around 2 coins darkened with frost. He pushed them under the binding at his wrist and pulled his sleeve down. His face was wet with fear, not greed alone. Fear for himself. Fear for the woman waiting in his doorway. Fear that when the hoard was locked away, nothing would be left for them but empty bowls. The child stared at him. Orm put 1 finger to his lips. The child did not speak. Across the yard, another man slid a small ring into the seam of his mitten. Near the fish racks, someone pressed a coin into the hollow under a loose board. Each theft was small. Each was done with the careful shame of someone who knew the order and broke it anyway. Ulfric did not see them. Leif saw one. He looked at Orm's sleeve, then at the barred door, then at Ulfric. For a moment his mouth opened. No sound came. The skald who had praised the raid had no song for this. If he spoke, he would name a man whose family might starve. If he stayed silent, he would become part of what the gold wanted. Astrid turned her covered face toward him. "What did you hear?" she asked. Leif swallowed. "Nothing I can prove," he said. The answer hurt him as soon as he gave it. Inside the burial shed, Hakon scraped once more against the braced door, weaker now or farther away. The sound traveled over the snow and reached the fish store. Every head turned toward it. For one breath, the whole village listened to the dead and the sealed hoard in separate darkness. Then a woman near the edge of the crowd gasped. She was looking past the burial shed. Ulfric followed her gaze. Beyond the last torch, beyond the trampled path, snow moved between the dark shapes of the outer sheds. At first it looked like wind lifting loose powder. Then the white parted around something standing still. A figure waited in the snow. It was too far away for a face, too still for a living guard. It stood where no one had been posted, half hidden by the blowing dark, and its shoulders held the wrong patience of the dead. Freya drew her blade without being told. The hidden coins stayed cold against living skin. Ulfric lifted the torch, but the light did not reach far enough. The figure remained beyond it, a dark shape in the snow, while the village understood that the sealed door had not ended anything. Thank you for listening. This chapter ends here, but the story continues. Follow the series for new chapters, and when you are ready, explore the other worlds and storylines waiting beyond this one. If you enjoyed this episode, leaving a like or a comment helps more listeners find the story.